This morning I want to begin a short series before we do our fall kickoff this September 10th, and just talk about a few things this September when we do that, and we kick off our fall ministries and our life groups. We're going to do a study called God Space, and it's really it's from a book that I've read and had to read, and it's required reading for the men and women going through our pastoral assessment center. They have to read this book as when they come there, and we do the assessing of pastors and ladies and pastors' wives that are heading into ministry. And it's really a book that's trying to help us be able to talk to a world that looks a lot different than maybe the one that you grew up in, where it was not that difficult, and everybody knew the language you were speaking when you said the word gospel or sin or Jesus. There's kids that don't even know what that is, or who he is, I should say. And it's a book that's trying to help us be able to do that, and be able to do it in a loving way, and we're going to be studying that in our life groups. There's a DVD that goes along with that, but if you're a part of a life group, you're going to be digging deep into that book. And on Sunday morning, starting September 10th, we're going to be preaching about God's space and what that looks like, what that means, and how that can help us do what God's called us to do. And that's to reach this world. God hasn't called us to build four walls and to come into this place and to stay here like it's a fortress. He's called us out into that place. This is more like an outpost in enemy territory, and we're taking territory back for the one who rightfully owns it. And so we have to go out there and do that. So God's Space is trying to help us do that. So we'll be looking at that in September for 6 weeks, and then going through that together in our life groups as well. So for this morning and for the next 3 weeks, I'd like to look at something that I think is important. I actually had this sermon planned for last year, this 3-week series planned for last year, and some things came up with scheduling. I wasn't able to do it, and so I thought this was going to be a good time to put it in, because our school's going to start, schedules are going to change, and if life hasn't been fast enough for you already, many people's lives are going to go even faster. And it is a epidemic, I think, in our culture, just the pace of life. Maybe you know that. Maybe you've seen that, how the pace of life has changed. Maybe if your pace hasn't changed, you can see it in your kids or your grandkids. The amount of things that they do, the pace of their life. And I think there's a deeper thing happening that understanding the Sabbath, I think, can help us address as believers, and even help us witness to the world around us about who we are and what this God has called us to. Because if you change your pace of life and slow down, and everybody else is zooming by you, somebody's going to say, how are you moving this slow? What are you doing different? Because I feel like I'm at the end of my rope. I feel like that I'm on the go always. And living this kingdom life is a witness in itself without even saying a word. Living the life Jesus has called us to is a witness itself to the world around us, because it looks different. You're a part of a different kind of kingdom when you're a part of Jesus' kingdom. And so understanding the Sabbath is a piece of that. And I'm going to challenge our thinking on that and go 3 Sundays. So you got to stick with me for 3 Sundays in understanding what this Sabbath is all about. And we got to start where it all begins, and that's in Genesis. Genesis chapter 2 is what we'll be looking at this morning, where it talks about the creation account. And we ask, did God get tired? When it says God rested, did he get tired? Did he need a break? Did he have to rest? That creation account has impacts and influence over the Jewish people and really over all of creation itself from the beginning until Jesus returns again. And so it's important that we understand that piece of it as we move forward and understand what this Sabbath is all about. When we hear that word, if you've ever heard that word, you should have heard it. And when you read the Ten Commandments, it's a word that's used often. It's actually a word that is still argued about even today on what is the Sabbath. And so we're going to look at some of that. But first, the way that I think we need to understand it begins with something that many of you probably did. Did any of you go on vacation this year anywhere? Raise your hand if you did. Some of you went on vacation this year. Why do you go on vacation? If you didn't go this year, why do you go on vacation? Why do you take vacation? And when you take that vacation, where do you go? Is it usually someplace you enjoy? You go someplace on vacation that you enjoy. Now, depending on what season of life you're in, maybe vacation isn't much vacation if you're chasing kids around all the time. That's why I go to the cabin, because they can run wherever they want to. I don't got to worry about it at all, just snakes. But I told them to step on the heads of those. So you go on vacation to get away from things, to take a break. So vacation for me is not getting up every Sunday morning and coming here. That's not a vacation. I know this doesn't look very hard, and shouldn't take that much energy for me to do this, but I don't know how other pastors do it, but my Saturday night, regardless of where I'm at, I'm already thinking about this. Saturday night is not vacation for me. I remember being in seminary, and there's different kinds of tired. There's the physical fatigue, where you sit down, you rest a while, you sleep, and you can get up and go back the next day. Then there's the mental or the emotional fatigue, and that's a little bit harder to come back from. And my mental fatigue is thinking through all this kind of stuff because it matters to me what I say to all of you. And these questions I'm trying to ask and answer myself, because I'm also trying to live this kingdom life, and I want to do it well and be able to be a model for my kids as they grow up, and hopefully be a model for people a part of Grace Church. So vacation for me is not Sunday morning. Vacation is doing stuff like this, going out to God's creation and thanking them for being God's creation, and giving them a kiss, and then going to kiss your wife right after that. No, I didn't do that. But that was a nice fish. I was in the stream, 15-inch bass. They were hitting this week or last week, so it was nice. So vacation is not so much all the Saturday night prep that's going on in my head, or the Sunday morning and actually doing things and getting ready, and the week of ministry that happens in lots of different places, lots of different ways for me. I try and get away and go on vacation, and then you get to do stuff where, who knew that the inside of a tractor tire you could put on the river and float down and be wonderful. So we got inner tubes. If you've ever went tubing, has anybody ever done that, or am I weird by doing that? Okay, you're weird then too. You inflate these, what was like tractor tires, these giant tires, you throw them in the creek, and you just sit on them, and you float down the creek. And that's relaxing. That's refreshing. All you have to worry about is not running into rocks. And it's fun to do. You get to take girls through tunnels that cars drive over. You can't see what you're walking through. You tell them that there's no snakes in there, but you have no clue. And you just go through tunnels. And you get to be surrounded by women all week. I got to be surrounded by them all week long. And, of course, I get to stand out in that stream and just enjoy it and just look. A friend of mine, or one of the guys that comes to second service, he had the opportunity to go to Montana and stand in a stream in Montana and go fly fishing. And he said that you just got to stop fishing and just look around and just appreciate it. And honestly, I think we're hitting a little bit of what the Sabbath is intended to be when we have those moments, when we have this time. Because if your life only slows down for 7 days out of the 365 in a year, you're in a lot of trouble. And God knew that, and God did something to help us with this life in the created order itself. And This is a piece of that. Like I said, the Sabbath for me is that kind of thing. Is being able to stand, and everybody's different. Now, my wife wouldn't say that. I mean, she does it, and she enjoys the cabin, but she could sit on the beach and just sit there all day and listen to the ocean and read a book. And I can do that too, but there's places that you love that you can just be there, and the world is at ease, at peace. It doesn't matter what's going on around you, and you can just take a deep breath and enjoy the time. I think the Sabbath that's God's intent with the Sabbath. And we're going to see that as we look at Genesis chapter 2. And so I want to point out three different things, not necessarily in this order, in these next three sermons. Understanding the Sabbath in just 3 weeks. I have it in parentheses because I don't know if that's going to happen. I don't know if you're going to understand it in just 3 weeks. I hope you do, but you might not. And that's okay, because I'm not sure I get all of it yet either. I'm still trying to work on it, figure it out. But for the next 3 weeks, we're going to look at a couple of things. And you might agree with what I say, and maybe you're like, I'm not sure that's exactly right, Ted, because the reality is there's still debate going on what this word, the Sabbath, means and how it applies to Christians. And so here's three things that I'm going to look at. The Sabbath equals covenant. The Sabbath is about a covenant that God made with Israel specifically. And we see that in the Old Testament. We see that especially in the covenant that God makes with Moses and the Ten Commandments, and even before that, when they were wandering in the desert, and God said, collect extra manna, that stuff that we're not exactly sure what it was, but they're wandering in the desert, and God's providing for them, and they were supposed to collect extra manna on day 6, so that day 7 would be a Sabbath to them. They weren't supposed to do anything, so you collect as much as you can on day 6 so that you don't have to do anything on day 7. So this Sabbath, this covenant God had made, is actually originating from creation itself and is reaffirmed with the Jews and Moses and the Sinai covenant when he's on the mountain getting it from God, and it's part of the Ten Commandments. So the Sabbath equals covenant, and I'm going to suggest to you that Sunday does not equal Sabbath. They are not one and the same. And there's lots of debate over that very issue. And I just read a book called The Brief History of Sunday by Justo Gonzalez. And what I'm going to try and do for you is sum up that book in a very short amount of time. I love history and I love reading, and the problem is I get a lot of information about that. And the more information I collect and I get, the longer I'm going to be on a Sunday morning. So I'm going to try and block out some of that information that I have. I got an award in seminary for research. They're like, Ted, you do great research. So I could write 20-page papers, 25-page papers, no sweat. I mean, it was hard, but I had the research there. I enjoy doing that. So I am going to spare you that. I'm going to try to spare you that. But I read a book about this, and I've read multiple commentaries about this. And I want to suggest that Sunday does not equal Sabbath. And in the next few sermons, I'm going to try and explain to you why that is true. And why the Sabbath is something actually more than or greater than just a day. The Sabbath, what happened at creation, what this covenant God made with his people, specifically Israel, and what God's intention is with the Sabbath is greater than or more than just one day. And so for the next 3 weeks, I want to try and help us see that, because I think understanding the Sabbath has profound implications on your life and my life in the 21st century. And I think especially today, with the way our lives are. So what we have to do first is understand what the Sabbath means, what that word is. And I just want to read for you this beginning part of chapter 2. Everybody knows, hopefully, what chapter 1 in Genesis says. In the beginning, God created what? God created what? The heavens and the earth. Thank you. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. This is Genesis 1:1. This should sound very familiar to you. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And verse 3 says, "And God said, 'Let there be light.' God spoke it, and it was, and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and He separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness He called night. And there was evening, and there was morning the first day." That language will sound very familiar as you read through chapter 1 of Genesis. And God said, "Let there be whatever." Whatever God's creating, it begins with 6 different times. God says, and it is, and creation happens. And at the end of that, God sees that it's good, and there was evening and there was morning on the first day, and there was evening and there was morning on the second day. 6 days that happens. And then we get to chapter 2, and it says this: "Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. By the 7th day, God had finished the work He had been doing, so on the 7th day He rested from all His work. Then God blessed the 7th day and made it holy, because on it He rested from all the work of creating that He had done." Now, we've kind of changed the language up there a little bit in English so that we would understand it. But that word 7th day, if you actually translate it literally, there's 4 different lines, and the word 7th day is used 4 different times. And if you'd actually put it on a screen, I didn't do it for you, but that 7th day would line up perfectly. There was something about that specific day, and you heard that said that this day God rested after everything was created. So the question is, what does that mean, that God rested? Did God get tired? Because we know that other places in the Bible it says that God does not sleep, that God does not get tired, that God does not slumber. He is always watching. He is always attentive. If they don't even use the word sleep, they're making the statement about God being awake all the time. When Elijah was going against all the prophets, and they were supposed to call down fire upon this thing, and they couldn't do it because, of course, these false gods were not real. And Elijah tells them, "Well, why don't you go wake up your God? Maybe he's sleeping. Maybe that's why he's not doing what you're asking, because he's sleeping." And he was contrasting his God, Yahweh, the God of the Bible, who doesn't sleep, with this other God. So did God get tired? What does that mean, that on the 7th day God rested? Because that language, this verse, has implications until the end of the Bible, this Sabbath or 7th day. So I did all the work for you. This is what seminary education does. It helps me know which books to find the information in. And then I get to type it on this screen and make it look like I know what I'm talking about. But really, these other way smarter guys know what they're talking about, and I just try and compile the information for you. And I don't want to go through all this and explain all the stuff that I read for you, but I want you to see that the language is very important for us to understand as we move forward in understanding what the Sabbath means. So that word, that God rested, "Thus the heavens and the earth were completed." That is the same root of the verb rested. So when it says the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array, then it says by the 7th day God had finished the work He had been doing, so on the 7th day He rested. So those 2 words in Hebrew have the same root. The root verb is were completed, or was complete, or to completion. And what it actually means is that rested word is not like I am tired and I need to go take a nap. It's more of a cessation, a completion, a stopping of creative activity. So if you have ever, if you like building something, if you like to build things and maybe you've built a deck, maybe you've built something great. Now you're not God and I'm not God, so we do get tired. But after you've done that and it's completed, how does it feel to just sit on that deck and just enjoy it? Or how about if you like to do outside work, you like landscaping and things like that, or you like the way your yard looks, you've just cut it, you just mulched it, and now you're sitting on your patio and you're enjoying the way that it looks. It's all completed. There's nothing left to do until tomorrow and it rains and we get more weeds. But there's nothing left to do for that moment in time. That's creation. There's a cessation to God's creative activity. There's nothing left to do. It is complete. It is not God got tired and so he had to lay down for a while. It is a cessation from work. God's creative work was finished. Creation was done. That word, cessation, I'm just going to show you this. That word is Sabbath, which is stopping or ceasing. That is a Hebrew verb. That is where we get the word for Sabbath. If you look how close they are together, all you got different is you got this little thing here on the S, the long A, it's at a different spot, and there's two B's. That's how close it is in Hebrew. They're really just transliterating the word. So if none of that makes sense to you, all you need to know is that the word Sabbath derives from this, a cessation from creative activity. So when you hear that word throughout the Old Testament, it's all drawing back to this account, to this story of what God has done. In Exodus 20, where we have the Ten Commandments, and you hear that word Sabbath, this is the word they're using, and this is where it's coming from. God is telling them, you need to cease from your creative activity. Because work was happening before sin happened. So work and going to work every day is not a part of the fall. Work was happening. Adam and Eve were to tend the garden. Things were going on. There was work being done before sin entered the world, before the fall. And so your and my work, we are being like God in His image. We are image bearers of the Creator. When you put your creativity to work, you are modeling your Creator. God has given you a part in that. God has made you like Him in bearing His image to create and to build and to work. God created mankind. Well, guess what? God gave us a piece of that too. If you're sitting in here today, somebody helped to create you. I'm not going to get into that conversation. You need to talk to your parents about how that happens. But God gave us a piece of creation. You can create a human being, a man and a woman. We are bearing God's image in doing these things, and work is a part of that. And so God said, I've worked, I've done this creative activity for 6 days, and now it is finished, and on the seventh day He rested. That is where that, if you see Sabbath anywhere in the Old Testament, that is where it's coming from. That is the language that is being used. It is not fatigue. When God is saying to take a Sabbath, it's not necessarily just take a break because you're fatigued. It is doing something more. Now, we're not God, and God knows that we need that. So that's a part of it, the fact that there's a cessation from creative activity, from the work that you do. But for God, He was not fatigued. He saw that it was complete, and so He stopped. God chose to stop working because He had completed His good creation. Now that is important as we go forward, because this makes Israel completely different from everybody else in the ancient Near Eastern world. Every religion during Israel's time had a story about creation. You can find it anywhere. In Egypt, in Mesopotamia, if you go back into scholarly work, there were religions out there that all have this creation story. Here's the difference. In all of those stories, their gods rested because the purpose of humanity was to serve them. So now the gods didn't have to do anything anymore because we made humans. And now they're at our beck and call. Now they are serving us. And so their last day of creation, for those gods, it was one of rest because now we have all these humans who are our slaves. and they serve us. This God stopped creating not to be served by humans, but God served them in lots of different ways. This one day made Israel stand out from every other culture around them, every other religion around them. It made them unique in a lot of ways. And I'm not going to go into all the depth of what I read in that brief history of Sunday, but I think this is important to understand when we think about a calendar. How can a calendar make sense and fit into this? Calendars in the ancient Near Eastern world, it also, doing this little quote and understanding this, also allowed me to do this cool little thing with my sun and moon. Now watch them, okay? This is what happens. Calendars in the ancient Near Eastern world, isn't the technology wonderful? Did you see that rotating around there? That's the kind of stuff I'm thinking about Saturday night. It's ridiculous, but I do. Every calendar in that world had to do with the sun and the moon. Every calendar. Everything was directed, and the sun was the highest god you could get, and the moon was up there too, whatever name they gave to it, because life was directly related to the sun. If you didn't have the sun and the moon and the lunar and solar cycles, you wouldn't have the crops, and you wouldn't have all that you have. And so every calendar was based off of that. In Israel, their calendar was based off of a particular day, the Sabbath. So in Exodus chapter 20, when God is giving them this covenant, when He's giving them the Ten Commandments, and you hear these words, the word Sabbath is a synonym for seventh. This is where the Jews get that word that I said was a Hebrew noun, Sabbath, that was directly related to that Hebrew verb, that was directly related to God and rest, all that stuff. Instead of saying cessation from work, they used the word Sabbath, which is, you could put 7 in there. So if I read Exodus chapter 20, verse 4, it says, or not verse 4, I'm going to go to verse 8. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. Now this is when God's giving the Ten Commandments to Moses. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. The fourth commandment. Remember the seventh day, God could have said that, and keep it holy. It would have meant the same thing. You shall not 6 days you shall labor and do your work, but on the seventh day is a Sabbath day. It's basically repeating themselves there to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work. And then he goes on to say, nobody should. Not even your animals, not even your servants, not even your slaves. Nobody should. They based their calendar, their week, off of that day. So when you read in the New Testament, the way that they talk about it is 2 days before the Sabbath, or the day before the Sabbath. Because everything they did was based upon that day. That made them different from every culture around them. They based their day off of this day that God said, I'm making holy. Keep this Sabbath day, because on it, God rested. That, you can't see it in English. In the Hebrew, that language that is there, you could interchange it with Genesis chapter 2, and it would look exactly the same. God is drawing them back to the creation account because He is doing something with this day. It is not just a day. God is communicating something much bigger. What makes day 7 different? Now, I just read day 1, and I told you what it says. Day 7 is different. When we read day 7 in chapter 2 of Genesis, it doesn't say, then God said. That language does not appear. The heavens and the earth were completed in their vast array. Every other creation account, every other verse from chapter 1 to chapter 2 says, then God said, and it was done, and it was created. This day 7 doesn't have, then God said. It also doesn't have, and there was evening and there was morning. That isn't there either. And there was evening and there was morning on the first day, and there was evening and there was morning on the second day. Day 7 does not have that. God blessed the seventh day. He didn't say that about any other day. It doesn't say, and on the fourth day, when God saw that it was holy and he blessed it. It says, on the seventh day he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the seventh day and he made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of the creating that he had done. He blessed this one day and he made it holy, meaning he set it apart. That's what that word means. It is set apart for something else. God set that day apart for the Jews to recognize him as their creator and as their redeemer. That day was set apart where they're not to do anything, so that they could remember who God was and find rest in that. God blessed the seventh day. He didn't bless any of those other days. It doesn't say that. The number 7 is repeated 3 different times in that one little verse. In Jewish literature, that is a big deal. It's like when you type on a computer and you put it in bold and you highlight it and you put it in italics and you do like 50 font. That's what repetition was to the Jews. So the fact that at the end of this, we're repeating this seventh day, this seventh day, the seventh day, this Sabbath day, God is saying this day is very important. The seventh day stands outside the paired days of creation. There's 6 days of creation. There's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6. And 7's kind of out here on its own. And the Jews like numbers. 7 was one of those numbers. And that, again, is just an emphasis on this day. God is emphasizing this particular day because something bigger is happening here that's going to take place and have implications for the Jews specifically when God said, here's my covenant, and for the rest of the created order as well. The Sabbath, God and his creatures celebrate his good creation. We'll see next week and the following week that type of language, what God is asking them to do on that Sabbath day. He is celebrating, he and his creatures celebrate what he did in his good creation. And God is inviting us to join him in this rhythm of work and rest. Do you know this is as old as time? Work and rest. Do you know what we don't do today in the 21st century? We don't rest. How many of you are envious of all the little kids that get to take a nap in the afternoon? You know, you're like 3, Leah just does not want to take a nap. And all of us are like, oh man, I would love to take a nap. We are so envious of them. You know what my daughters, if you've had kids, you know this. What happens when they don't take a nap? When they miss their nap and they're out of their rest? It's like total meltdown by 7 o'clock. Rest is a part of the created order. God said, this is what you're supposed to do. This is going to set you apart from everybody else around you. You are actually going to base your entire calendar on this one day because I blessed it and I've made it holy and I've set it apart so that you can do this. You can celebrate with me and enjoy my good creation. And you can join in this rhythm of work and rest. Our Creator did it. He's saying we're supposed to do it. And the one thing we don't do today is rest. That's why I say this is not restful for me. And everybody has their own schedules on Sunday. Some of you do your grocery shopping. Some of you do cut the grass. Some of you do this. Some of you do that. And that's okay, I think. But what's not okay, and I say this to myself as well, is having 6 days of work and I get a 7th day that I can fill in all the other stuff that I've missed. And I'm challenging myself with this series because I enjoy doing yard work. I enjoy working outside. I enjoy building stuff. I enjoy doing all that kind of stuff. But the problem is I am still getting tired. I am not doing what I did when I was at the cabin, and I just stood there in that stream, and I just looked out at God's creation, and I enjoyed it. And I said, God, you are amazing. This is beautiful. How often do we do that? How often do you just take a walk and do that? I want to suggest to you that God wants us to get in this rhythm of rest. And I think as we look at this and explore this for the next 2 weeks, that it has huge implications for you and I today in the 21st century, when our calendars are filled to the brim and we are at the end of our rope and we are frazzled and we are short with people and we are stressed out and we have anxiety over stuff because we just can't slow down. And God says, I am inviting you to celebrate this thing that I have created, this world that I have created, and I'm inviting you into this rhythm of work and joyful rest. Rest is joyful, isn't it? When you get to just sit there and not do anything. God says this is how the world is set up. The Jews were set apart with it, and guess what? If you and I actually did this, we'd be set apart from our culture too, in a lot of ways. And we're going to explore what that looks like and how we can do that in the next 2 Sundays. So let's pray. God, thank you for building into this world this day in which we're supposed to cease and enjoy your good creation and get into this rhythm that you have built into creation itself. Lord, help us as we go through these next couple of Sundays, as we're going to get into the schedules of school hitting, fall sports and fall activities and fall ministries, Lord. Lord, help us to make sure that we are doing this, that we are enjoying that rest, God. It is hard nowadays. God, I pray that you would help us to regain our understanding of the Sabbath and what it means, and I do think it can have huge implications on our life. And I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.